it's not sufficient to just say, okay, here are our 7 archetypal customers, and here are the kind of main problems we want to serve with them. Great, you might do the top 20 or 30, but what about the other 99% of it?
Hello and welcome to the Checkout Scout tent. In the tent today we have Liam McGee from Kaiasm, which is a fabulous technology firm that helps businesses align what they're doing with the needs and demands of consumers. So welcome, Liam.
Thank you very much. Hello, Aaron.
So it's great to have you here today, and to kind of kick off, it'd be good to understand a bit more about yourself and your path, and kind of what makes you passionate so much about the data and the work you do at Kaiasm.
I kind of picked up 3 master's degrees and a fellowship of the Linnaean Society, which is the Taxonomist Society in London, and I've ended up an accidental expert in human categorisation, so how we divide up the world around us and refer to it, and also visual cognition, how we use our eyes to understand the world. And I also happen to have access to the largest repository of expressed human need the world has ever seen, which is something we built over 10 years from many sources. 10 years ago, I set up a business with Steve Johnston, who was the foremost Google consultant at the time and invented the term, I think. And we wrote a top-selling book together about how Google reads websites, because Google is effectively a blind user, and since then we built a 30-strong team of data scientists and data analysts and web specialists in a farmhouse in Somerset, and we've spent time working for people like hotels.com and Expedia and financial services, Lloyds TSB, bought by many, the pet insurers, pet tech firm, and also NHS, Ministry of Defence, but also lots and lots and lots of enterprise clicks and mortar businesses, which I guess is why we're on today with you. And we're perhaps most famous for the groundbreaking work we did with Screwfix, part of the Kingfisher Group, and that helped them become the dominant force in online e-commerce that they are today.
A lot of data, a lot of analytics, a lot of degrees. That is.
Eventually, after a slow start.
But I think, what are the core challenges that your customers are seeing in the moment, Liam, and kind of how does Kaiasm help with that? Or Kaiasm, sorry.
That's okay. In all honesty, our e-commerce customer base tends to sit in the sort of homewares, home improvements market, bit of pet care, bit of mother and baby, and they were all markets that really didn't suffer too much actually from the pandemic, as they were largely allowed to remain open as critical retailers. But it definitely sped up a lot of trends that were happening anyway. So it was really interesting. We see essentially all of the things that people ask for. So we're very interested in data on Google and people's on-site search and things like that. But we're not so much interested in the kind of traditional approach to that data, which would be, say, keyword research or search engine optimization. What we're really interested in is how this categorizes the world, and the ebbs and flows of what people are asking for and what people are needing. And what we saw with the pandemic is because a lot of people stopped advertising for a little bit, it stripped away a lot of that kind of sort of push marketing, I suppose. And what was left was people had a real need and they went and got that thing, a real need, a proper need, not a need that they were convinced into, let's say. Mm-hmm. And so we also saw obviously huge numbers of people go online. If you look at Kingfisher's recent results, I think Amazon were up over 50%, and that made Retail Week. I think Kingfisher were up about 154%. It was enormous, and that's overall. And bearing in mind that that includes the bricks and mortar side, which was only up about 20%, you can imagine how much the online side was up. So there's been a huge blossoming in what people are doing online. Lots of people who maybe hadn't really got to grips with it. There's always this assumption that everybody's like us, right? We work in e-commerce and therefore everybody uses e-commerce, and it wasn't true. But it's almost true now, and it's easier and it's quicker, and people have done the learning. They've overcome the barriers, so that stays. Even when the pandemic goes away, that stays, and people are unlikely to go back towards more inconvenient ways of transacting. But also, my expectation is that click and collect will only grow really, and also e-commerce will only grow simply because a lot fewer of us will be going back to the office on a Monday to Friday basis henceforth. The things we've seen in the data which are interesting and not everybody may have sight of is that there's a lot going on with the reuse economy. So these would be things like shopping for new with tags clothing on eBay or vintage clothing. Also sites like Depop, where people will buy and sell clothing they've just bought. And we were seeing with pre-lockdown trends, but also mirrored in post, that we think it's likely in the UK that there'll be more money being spent on second use clothing or new with tags clothing than you will see on new clothing by about 2023. So that's a huge change. And you're seeing also things like the right to repair, which means anybody selling appliances maybe needs to rethink their approach. And they may also want to think about facilitating those kinds of secondary markets, things that are going to last a bit longer. And so it's worth reselling. And then the other thing we're seeing is that there's been a lot of government and regulatory concern around the way we use data, because we've all just essentially given up a lot of our rights over our data, if you like, because we also would quite like to go outside again. So allowing people to track really every movement, and are we going to be coming into contact with people who might have COVID? That was a big shift, and so government are becoming increasingly concerned. You can see people, Facebook and the usual suspects, if you like, starting to do big, this is our good data approach, and these are the things we're doing to use our data for good. Data for good is becoming a bit of a buzzword. Rather raises the question of what they do the rest of the time when they're not using data for good. And also, there's quite a lot of things coming through the regulatory pipeline about the way we use data. We also had GDPR affected us, and you can read a bit about that if I'm allowed to plug a friend's book. Sam Gilbert's Good Data comes out this week. We're in it. You should all go out and buy a copy. We've all had some time to think and strategize a bit, and that goes for both technology vendors like us, but also the e-commerce players, and starting to think about what society needs from us, those sort of bigger questions, thinking outside in. So Amazon always had this stuff, start with the customer and work backwards, and I think there's a broader thing of starting what society needs from us as businesses and work backwards from there.
In terms of the technology and the e-com tech landscape, who are kind of the businesses that you've seen that are really kind of on fire at the moment and trailblazing?
I think the Hut Group are really interesting. So we were brought in for part of the Homebase turnaround 2 years ago, and Homebase eventually kind of picked up their entire e-commerce and digital section, lock, stock and barrel, and outsourced it. And the Hut Group are interesting because if you just open the Homebase website now, you will see it loads like that. It's really, really fast. And that's because the Hut Group are controlling the business processes and their technology stack and the tin, and it's their own CDN. And it's really interesting, having spent 20 years saying, yes, it's plug and play, and you bring all these bits together. To say no, you can actually run it very efficiently as a whole stack. The other firm I think is particularly interesting at the moment, which might not be very visible to UK consumers, is Kaios. No relation, K-A-I-O-S, and they build really, really good feature phones. I think the idea is they should be less than the cost of a bicycle in the local market, where they've got a lovely app ecosystem where you can be out in places like sub-Saharan Africa, or kind of rural India, where you've got rubbish signal, but nevertheless, you can have a brilliant experience online, understanding local market prices, getting information about weather, really critical stuff that we might take for granted. And for me, I think that that's an area of expressed social need that I would love to get my hands on to analyze. Our approach to e-commerce is very holistic. So we take the view that all of your design should pivot around the needs of people. So that can be internal as well as external. It can be further up your supply chain as well as with your customers. But the first thing you need to do is fully map and understand the needs. And we saw a great piece of work by PwC, they'd interviewed 1,000 or so CEOs in 2009 and again in 2019, and asking what the most important data was. I'll just make sure I get the wording right. So data about your customers and clients' preferences and needs. That was the most critical data that those CEOs came back with 94 or 95% of them saying that was it. Across 10 years difference, it was still the top one, still at the same amount. But the number of them who thought they had enough data about it, whether it was adequate, whether it was comprehensive, only 15% thought it was comprehensive. So that's down from 21% in 2009.
Wow.
And if you start there, everything else, your category hierarchy, your product data, the things you're buying, the filters you're offering, it all just falls into place. The language you're using, and it all just falls into place around what your customers need you to be.
I agree. I think putting the customer at the heart of decision making is something that's often said by businesses, but then the reality when you peel it through, it's not quite there in truly understanding their wants and needs.
I think so, and I think you need to have the scale and ambition. You have to realise that in a typical multi-category retailer, you're probably going to be serving 40,000 or so customer goals. We'd normally say about double the range of products you have. That's how many customer goals you're actually going to be sold. It's not sufficient to just say, okay, here are our 7 archetypal customers, and here are the kind of main problems we want to serve with them. Great, you might do the top 20 or 30, but what about the other 99% of it?
So Liam, last question. So we've got a hypothetical £10 million check to wing in the post to you to set up the e-commerce business of your choice. What do you do?
I'm going to build a better Amazon, please, Aaron. So it's a more humane version. It's more supportive of small local businesses. So it'll automatically push you off to your local bookshop or local record shop if you were shopping, if they had it in stock, a bit like bookshop.org at the moment, actually. And it would also support tokenization of the supply chain. So it's kind of the good bit, the interesting bit, I think, of blockchain, which allows for much greater transparency. You'd be amazed by how little transparency there is, despite things like the Modern Slavery Act, in business supply chains. And I think it should be exposed to the customer. So I would love to do that. And I think there's lots of weaknesses in what Amazon do. They're amazing at logistics. They have an unparalleled range of stuff. They're really quite poor at categorization and offering filtering and product data, and I think that's where to sort of get the crowbar in and
I'm sold on that one. The hypothetical check is in the post to you, Liam. So thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. I look forward to it.
Imagine really sign it in a minute. So thank you very much for your time, Liam. Some really interesting points there. I think some really stood out for me about the matching consumer kind of demand and intent with the business processes all the way through from supply chain through to, I guess, the marketing, category hierarchy, filters, etc. I think that is the core of a lot of e-commerce success today. And if you're not getting that right, then that is a big opportunity for businesses who aren't doing that. So thank you for your time, Liam, and I wish you well.
Thanks very much. Cheers now.